Well, I'm Hugh Kroetsch, and I spent a total of 10 years in the North, 2 on the Arctic. I was the only guy who had a camera on board, nobody else. All my 10 years up north, I don't know if anybody else had a camera. I just filmed everything that I could see. The ocean, the whaling, the Eskimos, the houses that they live in.
I had heard countless stories about what the Arctic was like in northern Alberta, and I never really knew what he was talking about until about a year ago. He pulls out this old rusted ammunition case filled with spools of 8mm footage, and he sat me down and he showed me what it was like.
This can is filled with 8mm along the Mackenzie, up on the Arctic, on the Athabasca, at Hay River, the flood and ice jams at Hay River. It contains a reindeer roundup on the Arctic. It contains the buffalo hunt at Fort Smith. I showed these films at Tuktoyaktuk. I showed them at Aklavik. I showed them at Fort Smith. I showed them at Fort Chipewyan. And I'd get crowds. And I'd sit there and I'd talk about it. And the Eskimos, the Indians, they just loved it. Bob Kroetsch, the writer you've all heard about, he come up to me one New Year's and he says, "Hugh," he said, "there's 5 boys in your family. Usually the youngest boy ends up with the farm. You're the oldest. Heisler is not going to be an area for a guy like you." He says, "Why don't you come north with me?" So I went up north with him in 1949, and I went back for another 9 years. I spent 10 years in the north.
It's hugely important to have discussions about the Arctic and what's happening in the Arctic right now. It's interesting because as Canadians, the Arctic is ever so present in terms of our identity. It's in our national anthem, "The True North, Strong and Free." This is all part of what we think of when we think about Canada. However, many people don't travel to the Arctic. Many people have never seen what life is like in the Arctic and really experienced it.
There was no icebreakers in those days. There was no dew line. The dew line, for matter of fact, 1953, we done the first survey of the dew line. We hugged the shoreline right along the Arctic, right across to Spence Bay. I could tell stories for hours and hours and hours because I remember everything I did in the north. I remember everything since I was 4 years old.
I think it's really an exciting idea to take footage from the 40s of the Arctic and what it looked like then, what life was like then, what the issues were in the Arctic then, and to do a comparative with now. By looking at history, we can learn so much about where we are now and our future, but this is also part of science because the climate change issues are so intense. It is visible what is happening in terms of those changes.
I've never forgot about the North, for the simple reason was it was the highlight of my life. I've done many jobs since. I worked for AGT for 13 years. I worked for Access for 7 years. I still farm. But there was nothing like the North. That's the one that thrilled me.